We're running a little late, but we will begin the afternoon's proceedings at this time. And in the absence of our member of the Historical Society, Dr. Elaine Allen, we'll be having the Reverend Rosalina Robinson, Associate Pastor of Bethel Half-a-Tree, leading us in the opening prayer.
Let us pray. Our good and gracious God, we pause in this moment, in this space, to acknowledge your presence with us and to lift up our hearts in thanksgiving for all the many ways in which you revealed yourself to us today. Lord, we acknowledge that you cared for us, nurtured us, and carried us to this very moment. And we are grateful. We say thank you for this gathering. And we say thank you for the committee that has planned this gathering. And we wait expectantly now for how you will speak to us. That as we share together through the speaker, that indeed we will be motivated, we will be engaged, we will be present with this afternoon's lecture. May we be in tune and sensitive to how you will be speaking to us as we continue to wait upon you and tell you thanks. In Jesus' name, amen.
So, ladies and gentlemen, let me extend to you a warm welcome, literally, to the East Queen Street Baptist Church and to this, the 21st annual George Liele Lecture. We're truly grateful to God for allowing us to see another year, and we're truly happy to see all of you who have taken the time to join us here in person, and we also wish to acknowledge those who are joining us online, our faithful attendees to these lectures. And of course, we are looking forward to the questions. It's always exciting when we get into the discussion part, where you pull out so much more information and we are able to mine more gold from the presentation that will be made. So this afternoon, once again, we are happy to have with us our esteemed lecturer who will be introduced to us later. The Reverend Dr. Neville Kalam will be our lecturer this year. And in a short while, we'll be blessed with a selection from the East Queen Street Baptist Church. But before they come and as they're getting prepared to share with us, we will be getting the statement of purpose from our able captain of the Jamaica Baptist Historical Society, Mr. Jeremy Taylor, who will come now with the statement of purpose.
Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, I do not know about me being an able captain, but I welcome the rumor. In 2010, at the Mona Baptist Church, the George Liele lecture then was entitled Jamaica Baptist Union, the Past, Present, and the Way Forward. At that time, as a denomination, we were commemorating and celebrating two things: the 400th anniversary of the founding of the Baptist denomination and our 160th anniversary of the Jamaica Baptist Union. We have revisited the theme of the Jamaica Baptist Union again this year. As in 2024, we are reflecting and commemorating the 175th anniversary of the establishment of the Union. This afternoon, we have someone who has been integral to the work of Baptist witness in Jamaica, the Caribbean, and the world, the Reverend Neville Kalam. As this is a momentous anniversary, we have tried to go as far back into the past as we can symbolically. And since East Queen Street is a daughter church of that Elliston Road mission, we are here today. Furthermore, out of historical accuracy and historical tidbits, East Queen Street was also the host of the first George Liele lecture in 2003, which was delivered by the Reverend Clement Gale. The aims and objectives of the society are to research, document, preserve, and promote the history of Baptist work and witness in Jamaica. The society has staged the annual George Liele Memorial Lecture during October as a part of our contribution to heritage-related activities. The lectures are intended to educate not only the wider Baptist community, but the wider Jamaican community on important aspects of the history of this island and heritage, and also the contribution made by the Baptist Church in the development of Jamaica. It started as an itinerant lecture going around to the churches. So to date, the lecture has been held in St. James, Trelawney, St. Anne, St. Catherine, Clarendon, Manchester, Kingston, St. Andrew, and St. Thomas. But for the changes wrought by COVID-19, we would probably still be going to other parts of the island of Jamaica. And we still hope that we can recover this itinerant feature, making it a hybrid, make it a hybrid occasion with both online and still the visiting. But if one good thing has come out of COVID-19, it's that COVID-19 adaptations has also enabled us to reach a much wider audience. And we thank you again for joining us this year, especially our online audience. We are indeed honored and grateful that the Reverend Neville Callam accepted our invitation to address us on what is, it can be said, and on its relation to the topic, one of the lesser known aspects of our denomination's history. But the fact that it has not been lesser known does not mean that it has not been controversial in our denomination's history. And if you want to see controversy, just take a ride to Buff Bay and look at the historic Baptist church there on the left and look where the JBU church is now, as an example. The work of the society has depended on the goodwill and services and faith of a dedicated band of volunteers. Again, we wish to give our sense of gratitude and thanks to Mr. Onel Byfield, the glue that keeps us together. And except for these volunteers, we will have to say most of these volunteers are not trained historians except for the Reverend Dr. Dick, the Reverend Dr. Liele, and the Reverend Peter S. Pute. These are the trained historians in our society. Everybody else is just a history enthusiast, including the chairman. And as I speak about the volunteers who have made up the society, we just wish to pay a brief tribute to one member of our society that has gone on to glory. One such member of our happy band of volunteers was the Reverend Harris Cunningham. Perhaps it was his long and varied connection to historical institutions and places. He was pastor at the William Knibb Memorial Baptist Church in Trelawney. He was pastor at the Trinity Baptist Church in Manchester, one of our older churches. Pastor at the Morant Bay Baptist Church in St. Thomas. He was a chaplain at the Calabar High School. This affinity for historic institutions also drew him to the Jamaica Baptist Historical Society. Pursuing that affinity to history, he came to us, and we were glad and blessed to have him. We will miss the person who could be depended upon to lead and moderate the annual George Liele lecture while he was hale and hearty. And while he was hale and hearty, he hardly ever missed our in-person meetings. Usually, he was the first to arrive when they were held at the Jamaica Baptist Union headquarters. He was the one who would actually have to let us in many times. We will miss his energetic and forthright interventions in our meeting, and also the wise, prayerful counsel he often imparted in guiding us on our planned activities, and his willing participation to serve in diverse capacities. Reverend Cunningham has passed on to glory to join the communion of saints and those members of the society that have passed on and have no doubt greeted him and are maybe even holding a meeting while he's there. So he has passed on to glory to join the communion of saints, as how we Baptists understand that concept. Reverend Cunningham, you will be missed, but we will meet again. On behalf of the Jamaica Baptist Historical Society, I thank you all for joining us live and virtual being here.
Yes, you may, yes. We'll appreciate a better round of applause. Very good, thank you. And now we will receive the item from the East Queen Street youth. And also, let me check if Dr. Fairclough is around. Is she here? Wonderful, very good. So let us now receive the item from East Queen Street. There are the, okay, thank you.
We're pilgrims on the journey of the narrow road, and those who've gone before us line the way.
Cheering up the faithful, encouraging the weary, their lives a stirring testament to God's sustaining grace.
Surrounded by so great a crowd of witnesses, let us run the race, not only for the prize, but as those who've gone before us, let us leave to those behind us a heritage of faithfulness passed on through godly lives.
Come behind us, find us faithful.
before Dr. Fairclough introduces our speaker, we're asking the driver of a vehicle license plate number 8826GR, that's 8826GR. You are blocking the section of the driveway where the turn has to be made. We're asking you kindly to move your vehicle, 8826GR. And now Dr. Fairclough will introduce our speaker.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm told that a good introduction should not last more than 3 minutes. And I am not sure that I can put everything in that 3 minutes for Reverend Dr. Callum, but I'll try. I'm here to introduce our guest speaker, the Reverend Dr. Neville Callum, who will share with us at this 21st George Liele lecture on the theme of lands and buildings, a 19th century Baptist history story. Our presentation this afternoon will be given by someone who got his early nurturing at Gibraltar Baptist Church in the parish of St. Anne. He later graduated from the United Theological College of the West Indies, and later he pursued graduate studies at Harvard Divinity School, specializing in ethics. For 32 years, he served in 3 circuits of churches in the Jamaica Baptist Union: East Queen Street, Grace Mineral Heights, and Tarrant Balmagie circuits. In addition to his pastoral work, he was engaged in other activities not limited to, but inclusive of 2 terms as JBU president, serving as acting general secretary of JBU and Baptist warden of UTCWI. Reverend Dr. Callum was also actively involved outside of the Baptist community and was a lecturer at UTCWI and Jamaica Theological Seminary. He faithfully served as vice president of the Caribbean Baptist Fellowship, and for 10 years as general secretary, he was the chief executive officer of the Baptist World Alliance, delivering sermons and lectures as he represented the global Baptist community. He was later honored and given the title of General Secretary Emeritus. Reverend Dr. Callum has received several other honors, including the Doctor of Divinity degree from 4 universities and the Caribbean American Heritage Award from the Institute of Caribbean Studies in Washington, D.C. He has published several books, the most recent of which, From Fragmentation to Wholeness, Race, Ethnicity, and Communion. His upcoming book will deal with the history of ecumenism in Jamaica. Reverend Callum is a dedicated Baptist with a strong commitment to ecumenism. He served as chair of the Church and Society and Faith and Order Commission of Jamaica Council of Churches for several years. He was also a member of the prestigious Faith and Order Commission and the World Council of Churches and the Conference of Secretaries of Christian World Communions. He has conducted several researches and presentations on the life and work of many of our Baptist leaders, inclusive of George Liele. He has a wealth of knowledge on Lie's life and as we present our 21st Liele lecture on the topic of church, land, and buildings, a 19th century Jamaica Baptist story. We believe that there is no better person to engage us than our presenter this afternoon. So get ready to be inspired and challenged. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Reverend Dr. Neville Callam. Let us welcome him as he comes to deliver this afternoon's presentation.
I was outside of the country for a few weeks, and I'm telling you, I've come back, and it seems hotter than when I left. Wow. Please permit me to begin by acknowledging the honor done me through this invitation. Present the lecture whose oral version I'm now going to offer. It is in more conversational language than the formal documented lecture that should be available in the near future. In this year, when we mark the 175th anniversary of the formation of the Jamaica Baptist Union, JBU, the primary aim of this lecture is to show how the exercise of translocal authority has been advantageous to Baptist churches that pride themselves in being autonomous bodies, Baptist churches in Jamaica. The lecture will illustrate the danger posed by adherence to extremist conceptions of the autonomy of the local church and the helpful corrective provided by what may be termed Baptist covenantalism. Of course, from the beginning, Baptist ecclesiology, or understanding of church, has featured a careful balance between the autonomy of the local church on the one hand, and the interdependence of the local churches on the other. Among Baptists, these two dimensions of ecclesial reality must always be kept in balance. A secondary aim of the lecture, influenced as it is by it being one in a series of Georg Liele lectures, and consonant with the third example I'm going to give of conflict over property among Baptists in Jamaica, is to contribute to the storehouse of popular knowledge of the story of the Ethiopian Baptists of Jamaica. Ethiopian Baptists being the name that Liele himself used to identify the members of the church that he started in Kingston in 1784. So let me share with you the outline of the lecture. After this brief introduction, we will examine in turn how conflict over property manifested itself in the life of East Queen Street Baptist Church, Spanish Town, now Filippo Baptist Church, and Killick's Church, a former Georg Liele church, which no longer exists. Then we will examine steps taken by BMS to preclude conflict over property among churches related to the society, the BMS, Baptist Missionary Society. Once that is finished, we turn to the story of the journey to JBU's incorporation, addressing the primary motivation, the process leading to incorporation, and then ending with a few closing remarks. The journey is long, and we will see how far we can get into it this evening. Since we are meeting in this truly historic East Queen Street Baptist Church, let us begin by giving an example of the story of conflict over property in this church. Once deemed the largest Baptist church in the world, this East Queen Street Church has made a rich contribution to Baptist witness in Jamaica through the quality of its leadership and membership and the nature of its ministry over the years. It started its life, this church, after Thomas Nicholas Swigel, Georg Lie's chief assistant among the Ethiopian Baptists at Binbud Road, together with some members of Liele's church, separated themselves from the Windward Road Church and started what was called the Gully Church. Some years after Swiegel's death, the Baptist Missionary Society sent out Lee and Susanna Compier to Jamaica. During their brief stay in Old Harbor, Compier received an invitation from the Ethiopian Baptists at this church, conveying what they called a pressing invitation for Compier to come and serve as pastor among them. Compier agreed, and he began by gathering what remained of Swiegel's congregation, forming them into a vibrant ecclesial fellowship. After Compier's resignation from BMS, and I wish we had time to talk about that, was a very interesting story, and his departure to the US, he was succeeded by James Coulthard, who arrived to witness a 500-member East Queen Street church, and he doubled the membership in 5 years. Significantly, under Coulthard's leadership, the deacon at Liele's church on Windward Road, who had made the property at East Queen Street available for BMS use when Compier was pastor, followed the president at Liele's church, and in collaboration in Coulthard, took steps to have the East Queen Street property registered in the name of 12 trustees, some of whom were Baptists residing in England. The trust deed also contained a provision stating that the church property was to be, quote, for the use of ministers in connection with the Baptist Missionary Society. Ill health and other difficulties caused the Coulthards to leave East Queen Street and eventually relocate to St. Anne, where they did a marvelous work in St. Anne's Bay, Ocho Rios, and Brownstone Baptist churches. The next significant leader, I'm skipping out two of the leaders. Sorry, they were not here long enough so that I could classify them as significant leaders, but was John Burton. After arriving in Jamaica in 1827, he spent a few weeks occupying the pulpit of this church. And upon Coulthard's return, he relocated to St. Mary, where he did a marvelous work. In Port Maria, he gathered the scattered members of the church started there by George Gibbs, one of Liele's most significant associates, who had helped plant Baptist Witness across several parishes of Jamaica and had died in 1826 while ministering in Pembroke, St. Mary. Well, he gathered them, he formed a church, and he was having an exciting time of ministry with them. In a very short time, they completed their church building. And unfortunately, he had to leave. He didn't have to, but he chose to leave because the East Queen Street Church sent him an invitation. Because he was getting along so well in Port Maria and also doing work in Orocabessa and other churches in the vicinity, it was very difficult for him to leave. So he consulted with Coulthard, who would become his predecessor at East Queen Street, and 5 senior ministers, missionaries in Jamaica for advice. And they told him, you should go. So he decided, I will listen to the wisdom of the aged. And he came to East Queen Street. I don't know what he had to say at the end of his time here, but at the beginning he thought he was listening to the wisdom of the aged. He arrived just in time to make a presentation to the church. BMS had sent a circular to Baptist churches in Jamaica asking the leaders to give assent to a model BMS trust deed, whereby church properties under the control of BMS-related churches would be consolidated under a single BMS trust, which was being developed in England. BMS was in the process of setting up a system to vest these properties associated with the churches in certain trustees for the purpose of protecting the churches, the properties against alienation by an unprincipled minority of members in any church congregation.
When Burton introduced the draft trust deed to the leaders of the East Queen Street Church, they utterly rejected it. The two East Queen Street Church trustees who were still alive and residing in Jamaica refused to sign the proposed trust deed, and they mobilized the members of the church to join them in rejecting the deed. Soon, a rumor went into circulation. I'm not saying they started it, I don't know. And that rumor accused the new pastor of using a trick on the church. What he was doing, people said, was a ruse to enable him and the BMS to take control over the church property. And many of the members at East Queen Street found the allegation plausible, and this led to unrest in the church. Burton turned to the same men who told him to come to East Queen Street for advice. 5 senior ministers in Jamaica, including Coulthard. And when they heard what he said, they gave him advice. This is what they told him: initiate disciplinary action against the 2 trustees and terminate their appointment. Based on this, Burton formulated a recommendation and took it to a church members' meeting at East Queen Street. The members voted overwhelmingly to reject the recommendation for the 2 trustees to be disciplined. And encouraged by one of the trustees, the members decided to take a vote to terminate Burton's appointment as pastor of the church. Recognizing that a significant number of the church members did not want him to leave, Burton decided to gather up about 500 of the members, and he took them to Upper King Street, where he started a fresh Baptist witness. But this action did not receive the support of the senior BMS missionaries in Jamaica. And so in November 1830, Burton decided to return to England to confer with the BMS committee. In 1832, he returned to Jamaica, but not to East Queen Street. He went to Mansion Hill. And he was there in time to purchase land at Belcastle to start a church there, to help to build up the churches in Morant Bay and Port Antonio. But soon, the local authorities used the opportunity created by the declaration of martial law in the aftermath of the Baptist War and threw Burton in jail. After his release from jail in 1833, he and his wife decided, look, we need to leave this country. And so they went to serve as the first BMS missionaries in the Bahamas. It's very interesting in this book on the history of Baptists in Bahamas, how they describe how Burton fled Jamaica and sought rescue in Bahamas, where he started the Zion Baptist Church. And he's still celebrated today for having started that church, which has a tremendous effect, great witness in the Bahamas. Conflict over East Queen Street property erupted again during the pastorate of BMS-designated missionary Samuel Oughton. He had come to Jamaica to help Burchell in Montego Bay. He served there, enjoyed his time. Then he was sent to Lucy to serve in that part of the country, serving in Lucy and in Hanover and Westmoreland. And he was there doing well until one of the planters, quite concerned about the influence of this man, decided to file a writ in the court accusing him of libel. He was found guilty, and the Baptist fathers, perhaps your mothers here as well, decided we better send him to East Queen Street. He came to East Queen Street, and I have read the reports that he sent to England soon after he was here. Glowing reports of the kindness shown him by members of the church. He didn't know what to do with all the gifts they were giving to him. But soon he was thrown in jail again because he never paid the bill, the fine. Anyway, he came to this church. He appealed to a higher court, and the charge was thrown out, and he was freed of the charge against him. He was very happy because the people had been so generous to him. While he was in prison, they were having all-night prayer meetings for him, all sorts of things. When he was released by the court, pandemonium broke out because there was so much celebration in the yard of the courthouse. Houghton was free to come back to serve. Appreciative words for the members of the church. But 15 years later, his words about the church were not so lovely, because once again, he brought to the church for signing the BMS trust deed that had been finalized. The last of the trustees for the East Queen Street property, who was resident in Jamaica, was ill and at home and was dying. And he was the person who had fought and led the process to get rid of Burton. Now he was flat on his back, dying at home. And as he lay there on his deathbed, 12 members of the East Queen Street church paid him a visit 3 days before he died. And they promised to pay over to his wife, the dying man's wife, a substantial sum of money in return for the trustees signing a new deed entrusting the East Queen Street property to the 12 of them. The conspiratorial team concluded that this action gave them authority over the church property at East Queen Street. And once the document was signed, the 12 officers, took immediate action to have the newly drafted trust deed registered. And they thought their conspiracy was a complete success. When Houghton and the members of East Queen Street became aware of the existence of the deed that the dying trustee had signed, Houghton initiated action to challenge the authenticity of the deed in court. And he proved to the court that at the time when the dying East Queen Street trustee signed the deed, there was not another church trustee living in England, Dr. James Hobie. He never knew anything about this arrangement. He didn't sign. And so Houghton argued that the deed was null and void. The court made the mistake of ruling in his favor. And once this happened, animosity was stirred up against Houghton, and his life was threatened. I won't go into the story, because it's a terrible story about the things that they did to him. That time, the mission house was just over there where the school is, and he was really in danger. They had to send a detachment of soldiers to protect him at one stage. So, Baptist missionary John Clark wrote, after the disturbances had ceased, Mr. and Mrs. Houghton went to England and remained there for a season. They returned to Jamaica in 1858 and continued their work until 1866. But friends, today East Queen Street Baptist Church is indebted to Coulthard, Burton, and Houghton, and the unnamed deacon at Lile's Church for their timely action to preserve the property at 25 East Queen Street, Kingston, as a place for worship under the care of Jamaica Baptists. First story. Second story, the conflict over property at the Spanish Town Baptist Church. The conflict at East Queen Street was in 1830, primarily as the first case. The conflict in Spanish Town was in 1844, when the great churchman James Marcel Filippo was pastor of the church of Spanish Town, together with a cluster of other churches spread over a wide geographical area in Jamaican terms. These churches were many, and to lead them, Filippo needed assistance. And some were sent from the UK: Thomas Godden, Edward Bayliss, William Hume, and others. And Filippo also had some black Jamaican assistants whom he referred to as subordinate agents. I do not know if enough people have read this book written by Reverend Corley Bolt that tries to tackle with Filippo's attitude to race. The book is called Reluctant or Radical Revolutionaries. And recently, just a few weeks ago, it became available in Kindle version. And I would encourage you to read it. But in a letter to the BMS in 1837, Filippo said this, that for long he has had the services of upward of 40 subordinate agents, each of whom has a class house or place of worship in which he conducts the regular worship of God 1 or 2 evenings a week and so on and so forth. Larkin Lynch and John Auburn were two of those Jamaican workers, and I pronounce it Auburn because I suspect it's a Yoruba name. Lynch worked for several years as a clerk in the office of the Anglican bishop. Of course, at that time, the Bishop of Jamaica resided in England, and his powers and the duties were delegated to the Bishop of Kingston as his vicar and suffragan. After becoming a Baptist, Lynch was set apart to serve as deacon, and when Philippa was to be off the island in 1844, he assigned Lynch charge over the Sligoville Baptist Church. And when Philippa returned, 2 years later, he decided to leave him alone, leave him there. He was doing well, he was managing, and the JBU accepted him. He became a minister of the Jamaica Baptist Union. The other one, Auburn, Philippa referred to him as one of my native assistants whom I continue to find a devoted and excellent coadjutor. But the volume of his work was heavy, and Philippa was not coping. He was getting older, and his health was failing him. So he would have been very grateful in 1842 when the BMS sent out a missionary, Thomas Dawson, to assist him. Soon after arriving in Jamaica, Dawson found love. And very quickly, on June 7, 1842, he was united in marriage to Rebecca McLean, a Jamaican, born as a free person, September 20, 1814. And the wedding took place in the Spanish Town Baptist Church, but it was not conducted by Philippa. It was conducted by Henry Taylor, who was a Baptist pastor in Old Harbor. I don't know why Philippa didn't do the wedding. He was around. He left Jamaica 6 days after the wedding with his wife and their younger son, Edwin. So he was very much around. I don't know whether Dawson did not ask him to do it. But Dawson's marital choice would doubtless have endeared him to the members of Spanish Town Church. That same year, Philippa, 1842, having come from a tour of the Caribbean, took a break, went to England to try to reclaim his health. He wanted to be well again, for he wanted to continue the work he was doing. Well, while in England, Philippa seemed unaware of the crisis that was engulfing the Spanish Town Church. In fact, during his stay in England, he says he received letters from Dawson and the church, what he referred to as letters of kindness and affectionate gratitude. He was being deceived. Meanwhile, the two trustees of the Spanish Town Baptist Church joined with some disaffected members of the church in a plan to oust Philippa as their leader and to install Dawson in his place. It seems that the trustees believed that with Jamaica Baptists no longer operating under the auspices of the BMS, they as trustees, together with the people of Spanish Town Church, had the authority to decide to change the leadership of the church and to take over the church building. When they attempted the latter, church members who didn't agree with them prevented their success. So Philippa's detractors hastily constructed a booth in which they convened a church members' meeting at which the disaffected members of the church voted to appoint new church trustees, voted to dismiss Philippa, and to install Dawson as their new pastor. Perhaps they had learned something from East Queen Street, I don't know. But soon, to secure their concern and their control over the church property, they prepared, agreed, and registered a new trust deed. Upon his return to Jamaica, much to his disappointment, Philippa became aware of what had transpired while he was away, and he decided to file a claim in the courts to enable his resumption of the pastorate of the church and circuit, and to retain control over the church building. Legal proceedings dragged on in the courts for almost 6 years, and Philippa was grateful for the support he received from the BMS committee in London, who, though not desiring to interfere in the internal affairs of Baptist churches in Jamaica, affirmed Philippa's role as pastor of the Spanish Town Church and helped him to meet the huge cost of the lengthy court case. On November 4, 1850, the Vice Chancellor issued his judgment in the High Court of Chancery of the island. It was in favor of Filippo. And rejoicing over this outcome, the BMS committee agreed a resolution and circulated it as a memorandum to its supporters far and wide, in which the organization celebrated that, quote, property which cost £10,000 has been rescued from lawless misappropriation, and that, quote, this esteemed servant of God has been enabled to pass through a severe trial with honor to himself and the missionary cause, while the interests of the Jamaica churches, have been greatly promoted. Filippo was able to resume his pastorate and to retain control over the church building. The second crisis was over. And the reason the topic was changed from just 19th century to 19th and 20th century, as you will have noticed, is that the third example I'm giving, because this is a George Liele lecture, is really from the 20th century. This is a crisis over George Lie's church. We honor George Liele, in whose memory and honor this lecture is being presented, for his outstanding contribution to Jamaica's development. All Jamaicans, especially Baptists, owe an enormous debt for what was accomplished through the instrumentality of this great African American. Liele was an avid letter writer, and in a letter sent to English Baptist minister John Ripon, dated December 18, 1791, Liele informed Ripon about himself, the Baptist work he had started in Jamaica, and the building he was erecting to house the first Baptist church in the country. In a significant postscript, Liele added the following words: we have chosen 12 trustees, all of whom are members of the church, whose names are specified in the title proved and recorded in the secretary's office in this island. The postscript shines a light on what was a source of internal conflict in local Baptist congregations in Jamaica, which gives rise to the focus of this lecture on the relation of Jamaica Baptists and property. After Lie's death, Parson William Kellick, whose baptism Liele had administered in 1801, and whose ordination to ministry Liele had superintended in 1811, became pastor of the church in 1828. Now, that is the only representation of the church that I'm aware is available in print. It's quite dreadful. It's a 1915 print that was published in a report by the National Baptist Convention, USA, in their meeting in Chicago in 1915. Well, Kellick was an excellent pastor. In fact, it was not surprising that it didn't take long that the church came to be called Kellick's Church. In 1841, while he was still pastor, membership was reported to be 3,700, with 114 inquirers waiting for baptism. Before the end of his ministry, Kellick presided over the appointment of 12 persons as trustees of the church, and he had their names registered in a trust deed dated October 22, 1862. And the names of the trustees are on the screen. You can't see them, but that's all right. Because of visual impairment and old age, Kellick's association with the church ended, and the quality of church trustees declined thereafter, with disastrous consequences. A little over 100 years after Lie's death, the church started experiencing a constant succession of pastors, some recognized by the whole church, and some by only part of the church membership. Bennett, Leonard, Printer, Hobson, Stewart, Higgins. And Printer is my favorite one. He was an African American. He came here to lead the church. And there was a terrible conflict over him, because the people of the church said, we are not of the view that a foreigner can be our pastor. So eventually he had to leave, after he was accused of aiding and abetting some of the trustees in their misdeeds. With the passage of time, some trustees died or were dismissed based on conduct adjudged abominable, and they were not promptly replaced. So from time to time, the number of trustees was effectively reduced. Furthermore, it is evident that the group of trustees did not always benefit from gifted leadership and friendly cooperation among its members. Between 1918 and 1920, the men, whose names will appear shortly on the screen, can't see them either, presented themselves as trustees of the church, accusing each other, taking each other to court. Various infractions led a litigious set of trustees to embarrass their church, repeatedly, without prior consultation, without any kind of consensus having been agreed. Trustees began to rent portions of the 3-acre, 1.2 hectare property to different members of the church, including themselves, for use as residential property. Sections of the property were leased to non-members and for various works, including the private operation of a pottery plant. Different trustees granted tenants access to the church property and collected and kept the rental received without any accountability to the body of trustees. Nor did they normally turn over the money they collected to the church. Indeed, the church received no accounting at all for the funds accruing from the lease, rental, or sale transactions carried out by the various trustees. Some trustees sold plots in the burial ground that was adjacent to the church lot and belonging to the church, and they appropriated the money for personal use. One trustee, John Cole, even planned to sell a portion of the cemetery, allegedly to help with the restoration of the church building. In this decision, he was said to have colluded with erstwhile pastor of the church, Pastor Printer from America. Cole predicated his action on his desire to ensure the church's survival. He said to the court, "If it was not for me, there would be no church." And as time passed, the conflict increased among the trustees. One group of them decided to lock the doors of the church to prevent another group from entering and holding meetings. The other group forcibly entered the church by removing the locks, conducted worship, and then replaced the locks. To make matters worse, the trustees began to execute their designs on the historic Liele building, which had been damaged in the earthquake of 1907, but not destroyed. Some of the church trustees saw the damaged building, which had been completed under Lie's leadership in 1793, as an opportunity for self-enrichment. So they retrieved from the building whatever they could sell for personal gain. The lumber, the woodwork were collected and sold. The pulpit was reportedly used to supply firewood, with the explanation that it was rotten. No one was ready to account to the courts for what happened to the pews, but one litigant admitted that he had, quote, pawned out 2 of the communion sets in order to pay for litigation, with the balance of the funds being set aside for an unspecified purpose. According to one trustee, Joseph Anthony, when he saw what was happening to the church, he decided to erect a shed to allow the church to continue to have a place of worship. And in his own words to the judge, the old building was taken down, and I saw to it that a temporal one was put up, sir. He said that later a more suitable shed was built. I have a photograph of it, but it's so poor that I didn't bother to project it. Soon the trustees were filing lawsuits against each other in court, alleging abuse of office by other trustees who misappropriated church funds. And over a 12-year period, litigation filed by the trustees associated with Kellick's church consumed a considerable amount of time in the Kingston courts. And the Gleaner had a heyday, devoted generous space to coverage of the cases, which helped to further drive the name of the Windward Road Church into disrepute. The church membership dwindled, and in 1915, the National Baptist Convention sent a delegation here, a very distinguished delegation, to visit the church. They said there were less than 40 members at the church. But there was Pastor Higgins, Isaac Higgins, who came and made a valiant attempt to revive the fortunes of the church. In the end, he had to leave, like the other pastors before him. In 1933, he withdrew and went to serve as pastor of the Zion Hill AME Church in Islington. The poor stewardship of the trustees of Windward Road Church was another example of autonomous recklessness regarding property in the life of the Baptist community in Jamaica. Main reasons for the demise of George Lie's church were disunity, dishonesty, and desire for illicit self-enrichment by church trustees. While Lie's church did not seek membership in the JBU after the JBU was formed in 1949, the Baptist churches at East Queen Street and Spanish Town were active and prominent participants in the life of the Jamaica Baptist Union. They played a vital role in the union's development. But these churches had lessons to learn from their experiences with controversial property-related issues, and JBU had to do the same. So we turn to the JBU. What did JBU make of the lessons learned? And we have to start with the formation of the Baptist Missionary Society by 12 young pastors and one layman at Kettering in the East Midlands, England, in October 1792. And the interesting thing about it is that these pastors, most of them were pastors of very small membership churches, but they had a huge vision. They perhaps would never have had their names known publicly, apart from their association with the foundation of the BMS. Well, 51 years after they formed the organization, BMS members met in Exeter Hall in London and adopted certain regulations applicable to the society's operation. These included the terms of a model deed that would establish a BMS trust for church buildings and premises connected with the society and vested in persons chosen by the society. The development was meant to protect BMS property, BMS-related property. While BMS was doing this, their associated churches in Jamaica were taking steps in the immediate post-emancipation period to determine how they would move forward. In 1839, at a joint meeting of the Western and Eastern Unions, they approved two resolutions. The first, calling for the establishment of a theological college to train ministers, and the second, signaling their plan to involve formerly enslaved Baptists of Jamaica in taking the gospel to the people in the land from which they or their forebears had been violently snatched by the operators of the cruel system of enslavement of Africans. 3 years later, Jamaica Baptists, meeting in Kingston in January 1842, some accounts say August 1842, but it could not have been August, decided to withdraw from the funds of the BMS to prosecute their work better. In other words, they declared their independence of the Baptist Missionary Society. BMS was quite fine with that, and they accepted because they wanted to shift their emphasis to India. There were big arguments in England about the population of Jamaica vis-a-vis the population of India, and how far the money could stretch, and so on and so forth. And they also wanted to initiate work in Africa. Well, the Jamaica Baptists formed the Jamaica Baptist Missionary Society, opened Calabar, and formed JBMS, because they were going to go forward with their business. Meanwhile, realizing that in the years when they sponsored Baptist mission in Jamaica, they had made no provision to secure the protection against alienation of the properties they had acquired in the country, and knowing also that other properties acquired by the churches that emerged in the country over the years, had no legal protection, BMS decided to act. They offered to include the properties the organization had acquired for former BMS-related churches in Jamaica, as well as those purchased by the newly established churches in the trust BMS was establishing in England. They also committed to taking steps to commence legal proceedings to have that trust registered not only under British law, but also under Jamaican law. Soon after this decision was made, BMS started distributing the model trust deed for Baptist pastors in Jamaica to sign, and you heard already about some of the troubles that entailed. By this means, the churches, by signing the trust, the model trust deed, they would relinquish total control over their church lands and buildings and would secure in return security over the indiscriminate alienation of their property. In addition to circulating the model trust deed, BMS sent a deputation to Jamaica, a two-member, their esteemed Secretary Joseph Angus and Charles Birrell of Liverpool, a member of the BMS committee. They came here to answer any questions regarding the trust deed. They came here to find out how the Jamaica Baptists are surviving financially, for they had heard about the troubles that were being faced. And they came here to urge the Baptists of Jamaica to introduce new structures to serve the independent work that they had now launched upon. For the routinization of the BMS trust in Jamaica, the country's legislature would need to approve the draft instrument prepared for the purpose, and BMS retained the services of the law firm Orton and Garcia to undertake the legal work required for the trust to be established in Jamaica. Meanwhile, Baptist leaders in Jamaica appealed to ministers to sign the forms required for the establishment of the trust. It took 2 years to secure the signatures. And I'm going to ask for a photograph to be put up on the screen to let you see who are the people giving the trouble. You can't see them so well. It's mostly white men from England. Only a handful of Jamaicans were a part of the JBU pastorate at the time. After securing the signature of many of the Baptist ministers, BMS was ready to act. The lawyers made representation, publicizing the society's intention, etc., etc. And after several years of work, the act entitled "A Law to Consolidate and Establish the Trusts of Certain Congregations of Voluntary Religionists established and to be established in the island in connection with the Baptist Missionary Society in England," was tabled for consideration by the Legislative Council, was remitted to a select committee of the Council, and eventually approved as Act 13 of 1874, and then signed into law on July 22, 1874. After a decade of discussion, encouragement, and action, Baptist lands and buildings belonging to 40 circuits in Jamaica were finally consolidated under the BMS Trust Law 13 of 1874. The original trust deed vested the property in 25 trustees, including some of the BMS-sponsored missionaries in Jamaica. The trust deed that was approved by our legislators had 28 trustees. 11 of them were BMS missionaries serving in Jamaica. 6 of them were Jamaica Baptist pastors. 4 were planters. 4 of them were Londoners. They were BMS people living in London. And the other signatories included 3 laymen, a tailor from Falmouth, John McLaughlin, 2 pastors' sons, 2 missionary pastors' sons, James Cecil Filippo, and Thomas Bancroft, Houghton, a lawyer and a doctor. And there was also another signatory. His name was Samuel Bonzel, but there's no information about him that I was able to access. While the process to include property of former BMS-related churches in Jamaica under the trust was underway, Jamaica Baptists turned their attention to another matter that was crucial to their moving forward: they decided it's time to form a single union. And in 1849, as I said before, they made that decision. And at the meeting in Falmouth in 1950, the union was consummated. Walter Dendy as chairman, John Clark from Brownstone as vice chairman, and William Teal of Lucy as secretary. A little time elapsed before persons associated with JBU started discussing what should become of the BMS trust deed. Should not JBU attempt to accomplish the full Jamaicanization of the trust, with trustees identified by JBU alone? The process that led from JBU properties being under legal protection under Law 13 of 1874 and Law 16 of 1969 was a very long and challenging one. Time constraints will only allow us to refer to certain aspects. The discussions on the subject began in 1890 in earnest, 16 years after the BMS trust had been recorded. And the process took 79 years to complete. In a memorandum sent to the pastors and the churches in October 1894, one of my favorite JBU secretaries, Philip Williams, a rather interesting Welshman who served, is the longest serving secretary in the JBU history. Well, Philip Williams sent a circular that succinctly explains why JBU needed to establish a corporation. And I'm going to just quote the memorandum. Is the Jamaica Baptist Union to become a corporate body? For some 3 or 4 years, this question has been before the official members of the union and its affiliate societies, pressing for a solution. In a large body of independent churches, like those comprising the JBU, the question is beset with difficulties, probably unknown to churches of the episcopal or connectional type. It is therefore not an easy matter that can be rushed through in a month or a year. Hundreds of titles and trust deeds have to be collected from all parts of the island, examined, coordinated, scheduled, registered as a preliminary step to the drafting and passing of the law in the Legislative Council, creating a corporation of the JBU. We are pleased that at least the officials of the union are boldly facing the question and have appealed to the pastors and churches for their cooperation. This is all that is possible at present, but we trust everyone will give their best support. Some years later, a Baptist trust law was enacted by our legislator for the better securing of our denominational properties. He continues. It costs, if we rightly remember, some £200 paid by the BMS. How is it that advantage was not taken of the generosity of our parent society to secure a corporation? It is hard now to say. The omission has been regretted, even by those who would doubtless have opposed it in those days. The law is, however, practically inoperative and affords no safe ground to our denominational properties. More than half of the trustees under the law are dead, and the remainder are scattered over an indefinite area of the world's habitable surface. These trustees could never legally cooperate in the defense of any of our church properties if for some reason a lawsuit were entered upon by any person claiming ownership. While if some bit of property is to be sold, there is no end of trouble in obtaining the signature of such trustees as are surviving in Jamaica and elsewhere, and so on. He went on to explain, you all need to sign, you need to sign, you need to cooperate. The JBU leaders knew that in pursuing incorporation, it was going to take some work because some never cooperated in the early instance with the BMS. Year after year, the matter was discussed at the JBU Assembly. And at the Assembly, as good Baptists around the world know, if you want to get something off the agenda, discuss it and send it to a committee that you think will not do anything about it. So in 1929, the matter was fully discussed, the record says, and passed over to the hands of a general committee to receive attention. 1930, the matter was fully discussed and passed over into the hands of a general committee to receive attention. 1933, the matter was discussed, I didn't say fully this time, the union's consideration, and there was a full discussion, yes, it's added, the secretary was instructed to draw up and send to the churches the terms and conditions of incorporation and to ask to be supplied with the names of properties, etc., etc. Finally, in February 1942, 48 years after Philip Williams had sent to the churches the memorandum he had prepared on this subject, the JBU Assembly meeting in the Hanover Street Baptist Church took decisive action on the way to achieving JBU's incorporation. Prior to that assembly, the draft incorporation bill had been prepared, and the president, the chairman called then, the Reverend the Honorable John Maxwell, read the bill to the assembly. The delegates voted to accept the bill, and the leaders of the union committed to explaining the bill to the churches. The bill that would grant JBU legal status, grant the status of a legal entity that is entitled to hold property on behalf of the churches. And once the assembly agreed, the real work started. I'm going to skip over what I have here for it's just too much. But I just have to say, JBU made a decision that was marvelous. That year, they elected Arthur Stevenson as the chairman of the union, now called president. The first and only, shamefully, only layman to become president of the Jamaica Baptist Union. And he drove all around the country, and he spoke to the people, and he was credible. He was not a pastor. He was credible, and the people listened to him. And over time, eventually, the union started collecting information and attempting to get the matter going. One person from East Queen Street Church, who was on the executive, gave good advice, Mr. Fairweather. He suggested that the executive should appoint an incorporation officer to visit the churches and collect the documents, etc. Full-time person to the work. Some wise person in the executive, you always have these, said, why don't you accept it? Let us ask him to do it. The man who was fully engaged. And he was embarrassed to say no. So a year later, the union decided they need to do something else. They grouped the churches into zones, the parishes into zones, set one person over each zone and asked them to do the collection. It didn't work. Well, eventually, what they had to do is to get individuals to take responsibility for each parish, except that Luther Gibbs was in charge of Kingston and St. Andrew, to try to go to the people, to appeal to them, to cooperate by submitting the documents, the titles, the letters, the wills, and whatnot, so that JBU could show claim to proper ownership of the property. Meanwhile, and I'm going down, far down the projector, and I'm going to have trouble, the legal staff of several firms assisted the union, Samuel and Samuel, A.C. Carberry, D. Fitzrichson, working on the incorporation issue. Some visiting the Island Records Office, seeing if there are properties there belonging to the JBU that were not on the schedule. Finally, the bill was tabled for consideration in the House of Representatives, remitted to a select committee chaired by Mr. Talbot Forrest from Springfield in St. Mary, and eventually approved by the House and the Senate on March 25 and 27, 1969, respectively, and then signed into law by Governor General Sir Clifford Campbell on March 31, 1969. Through the incorporation law, all properties then owned and to be owned by JBU-related churches and auxiliaries are held in trust by the JBU Corporation in perpetuity. And JBU took a very wise decision that its office holders should be the trustees of the corporation instead of persons in their individual capacity. Well, we sent the document, the Incorporation Act, and the preceding document, the document that it replaced, and a number of other documents that we were able to retrieve from the BMS in England to one of our outstanding legal minds, the Honorable Justice F. Arjadon Smith, former Director of Public Prosecutions, former Judge of the Court of Appeal, Jamaica, etc., and he has said this: in my opinion, and this is no ordinary opinion, property transferred to and vested in the JBU at the time of its incorporation in 1969 remains the property of the corporation, and members of a local church or congregation are not at liberty to take with them any property of the corporation from which they are succeeding. If some members of a church or congregation, be they many or few, wish to depart from a JBU and set up their own church, they are at liberty to do so. But they are not at liberty to take with them property belonging to the JBU from which they are separating themselves, seceding. In the printed lecture, I explain the basis for the JBU's action in Baptist theology and polity, and in the discussion, I illustrate how that exercise of authority beyond the local level, but at the translocal level, proved itself to be a source of healing and help and protection for Baptists of Jamaica. So when Baptist people bring up the thorny issue of the autonomy of your local church, it is usually because there is a perception that some translocal entity is trying to trample on the rights of the local church. I believe no better example can be found to illustrate the importance of Jamaica Baptists have attached to balancing the tension between the independence of the local church and the interdependence of the local church comprising the JBU than the initiative that led to the formation of the JBU Corporation, whereby the properties attached to JBU churches and auxiliaries are held in trust irrevocably by the JBU Corporation. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, indeed that was a rich, comprehensive overview. And I'm sure that you have questions. Microphones will be provided. So as soon as you indicate, you will receive the microphone in the passage, in the aisle, and you may ask your question. But I want to just start off by asking Reverend Callum to offer us a little bit of clarity. For those who are not familiar with the term trustees, these persons who would have some kind of legal responsibility in churches, what is their role? And if you could make the distinction so that those who are more familiar with a leadership of pastor, deacon, and maybe a pastor, deacons board, or officers board might understand how it works, or how it worked then, and perhaps how it works now, because I believe there might be churches that still have trustees. I hope that you get that.
I will leave how it works then to the lawyer who is on platform. Yes. What used to happen in those days is that a particular church could not itself secure land in its own name, not a Baptist church. I can't tell you what happened to some of the other churches that were recognized by the state. And so they appointed persons whom they deemed trustworthy to act on their behalf and to serve as trustees of the churches. They were responsible to safeguard the property, ensuring the property would remain in the hands of the church. And in some cases, they also had leadership responsibilities that allowed them to influence churches regarding the situation with their pastoral leadership. That is, well, actually, I have a friend who is a trustee of a Baptist church in Florida. And I asked him the other day, what is your role? And it is the same. Enormous authority to act on behalf of the church. I do not know whether there are churches in Jamaica now that have trustees, but they really serve, they may have here, but they serve no useful purpose, because the trustees of the church are the JBU officers. The trustees of the church are the JBU officers. The president, the general secretary, the secretary, what used to be of the Missionary Society, whatever his name is now, the president of the Brotherhood, and I think there's one more, and the treasurer of the union. Those are the trustees of the JBU churches and church lands. Right.
Yes. Are there any other questions, or is that clear, sufficiently clear? Is there anyone needing further clarity? All right, so we have an understanding now of who, when the reference was made to trustees, who we're talking about. Now, I believe that you should have a lot more questions. And while you are warming up, which is usually the case, you take a little time to warm up, and then when we want to shut you down, that's when you are too hot. So if you have any other questions, you could make your way now, and we will answer those questions. The last clause, I'm sure you found that very interesting in the Act of Incorporation, that indicated that no one, if a church is seceding, if you're splitting from the denomination and you want to leave the Jamaica Baptist Union, you are not at liberty to take the church's property with you. And just earlier today, a number of us were making mention of what we have seen in Clarendon. We know of Clarksonville in St. Anne, and we also are aware of the Buff Bay situation. Those are the ones that we are aware of. The Buff Bay one, all right. So yes, we have a question, all right. So we have someone coming with a question, Rev, and perhaps after you're done with that, you could just tell us a little bit more about the Buff Bay situation, which would have been perhaps the most recent for those of us who would have heard about that situation. The question?
Let me just talk about the Buff Bay, the Buff Bay, Clarksonville, that set of churches. Because the process towards incorporation took so long, the lawyers advised the Jamaica Baptist Union leadership that they could not wait until every single soul agreed. Otherwise, the task would never be done. And BMS was getting concerned and contacting JBU asking, what is happening with this corporation? And so there was a cutoff date set. And all the churches that had agreed to cooperate by that date were included, their lands were included in the schedule of incorporation. The lawyers advised the union that once the Parliament approved the act, they could take action to try to retrieve the properties of those who did not cooperate. You know, I am an old man now, so I decided I was not going to put in the names of all those who were giving trouble and didn't want to cooperate. I won't bother with that. However, there were some churches that were very much at odds with JBU. They were at odds with JBU particularly because they didn't like what was going on at Calabar. They said Calabar had become a liberal institution, Calabar Theological College, a liberal institution, and modernism was taking over. And these people who were making the case were influenced by a certain minister who had come from Canada to serve in the Jamaica Baptist Union with the union's consent, who was stirring up opposition because he was a fundamentalist from Toronto. And so some churches were not comfortable about what was happening in the Jamaica Baptist Union, and they were insisting that JBU should get rid of the president of the college. In fact, 2 successive presidents of the college. JBU would not pay them any attention, and they refused to cooperate. Clarksonville was among them. For that church at Clarksonville, a large building, the community was established as a free village by John Clark from Brownstown. He named the village. In the full text of the lecture, I think the information may be there. And they said, no, we are not taking part in this. Buff Bay, the same thing. The pastor in Buff Bay was influenced by those people, and he influenced several others, and he influenced some of the members of the church, and they refused to cooperate. Well, after the act was passed in Parliament, I think the JBU leadership, they were tired. They were tired, and they couldn't be bothered to fight anymore. So they said, let them go on with the property. So those churches are no longer a part of the Jamaica Baptist Union. And if we had people in the union who had the time, which they don't have, and who were wanting to innovate and experiment, they could try and seize those properties now, but what's the point of doing that? If they are doing some work serving the Lord, I suppose you just leave them to continue and not worry about the property. But that's the reason why some lands formerly belonging to JBU are no longer in the hands of the JBU. The question?
Hi, good evening. Thanks for the lecture, Reverend. How important did race play during that time when you're selecting the trustees? Race.
The role of race during all of this, the transition period and maybe some of the conflicts in the search and the selection of the trustees.
I don't think it was a matter of race when they were selecting trustees. The BMS was an organization operating out of London. They were expending a lot of money in Jamaica. And they had a vested interest in ensuring that if trustees were being named, some of their people would be involved. And so that's why they named trustees. I think it would be absolutely in order for that to happen. Can you imagine if we were doing that, what would happen? We would want to make sure that we have our representatives there. And then when the act was being passed in Parliament here, eventually they reduced, well, actually they named the trustees, I told you. I skipped out the stage later on when they decided we need to rename these trustees. And they only named one, the president of Calabar Theological College. And all the other trustees were local Jamaicans. I don't think race was a factor. I think it was a proper concern about their interest in the project, that they named some of their people.
Thank you so much, Reverend Kalam. We have a couple of comments online, and then we will allow others right here to speak. We have, and I'd like to just extend to you the commendations we've been asked to share from Eslin Aljo, Blossom Rose, for the lecture that has been delivered. Very insightful, and they have learned a lot more as it relates to the property administration of property in the Jamaica Baptist Union. Dr. Blossom Amelia Nelson also mentions how fascinated and surreal, because as a Baptist missionary, she worked in Nassau, Bahamas, and her eldest son was named after the Reverend Talmadge Sands, pastor. So as a missionary, hearing all of this background information and making some of the connections.
Sands was one of the pastors of the church that Burton started in the Bahamas.
Right. The Reverend Stephen Smith wants to make it clear, or is asking for there to be a clarity to be offered, that no one can take JBU property. Is this still the standing rule as it relates to the Jamaica Baptist Union? I'm the pastor of the Sligoville Circuit, and I want to secede. So I'm taking the Sligoville Church with me. Is that something that I can do now in the current administration?
When you say if you can take the church with you, you can take the members with you, but not a single chair, not a bench, not an organ, not a microphone, no land, no building. Can't.
All right, sir.
I heard that there was a time when a lawyer was advising the JBU that this was not the case. That is why we decided a few years ago to try to get a proper qualified lawyer to advise us, so that we know what we are doing. But the fact of the matter is that from I was young in the JBU, Reverend Gibbs and Reverend Mackenzie told us. We learned that from we were very young. And we don't understand where this rumor has evolved, that you can take church with you. You can take the people with you, but you better get out of the building and make sure everything is left there.
All right, thank you so very much. We would like, Mr. Yes, Mr. Stokes.
Dr. Stokes.
The microphone. Stokes, his hand was up first, and then we go back to Mr. Espute. The microphone.
Thank you. Actually, the first question I had was asked already. And first of all, thank you very much for a very enlightening discourse. I think those of us who are enamored by the Baptist Church tend to forget how rocky it is and how difficult it is, you know, and so I thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. Before I ask my question, I'm hoping Dr. Emile Nelson can clarify whether she went to the Bahamas or the Turks and Caicos Islands, or what the connection is. She's online, so I'll allow her to do that. So with due respect, allow me to push back a little bit on the idea that race wasn't involved. And not to say that they were racist, but to say that when you have Filippo referring to agents, it betrays a certain less than-ness, which I think would have figured into the thinking of who do we put in charge of this asset. All right, I'm not saying it's unreasonable. I'm saying that even if you take race out of it, the idea of other persons than ourselves being in charge of an asset, whom we may not think have capacity to run it, but might have come into play. Let me just leave that with you. I think it's a little too clean to say that race was not played a role, none at all.
I was referring to this Spanish Town case. I was talking about the principle of naming the trustees. And I was arguing that any group of people with managerial responsibility, naming trustees for projects that are under their purview, have a right to have people from among them being included, and they were in minority numbers,
right,
in the list of trustees. That's what I meant.
Right.
In terms of the case in Spanish Town, I refer to Reverend Bowles' discussion of the complexity of the racial issue. Some racial issues are there, but they are very complex. And Carly warns against taking an easy way out. And maybe I was kind of taking it too easy on the side of they may not have been racist, but they were conscious of who they were. Yeah.
Yes, all right, thank you very much. And I wonder, and I don't know if you can be helpful with this, what route the Methodists took, or for that matter, the Catholics in Jamaica. I don't know if you know.
Well, I mean,
what?
When Peter responds, he could address that.
So he says trustees, not a, okay, which is interesting based on what you.
Well, remember that the church order within the Episcopal churches and the Methodist connection, church order is different from the Baptists.
Yes.
Do you use terms like the autonomy of the local church? Or you say local congregation? Huh?
He's going to ask about that. The last thing I want to, I know quote-unquote Baptist churches, and I see them, and they are not part of the JBU, and I'm wondering if at the time of incorporation, if there were no intellectual property issues with using the term Baptist, or you don't leave our furniture, go next door, you can call yourself Baptist, but leave the bench in the pews. Is that what? In terms of the word Baptist, Lord have mercy, you know, I have visited Baptists all around the world. Baptists have the most crazy names. All sorts of names. There was a church out at the road going up to Dovecot. I don't remember the name of the road. I was passing there some years ago, and I didn't have my camera, and I have never forgiven myself for not having. It was called Church of God in Jesus Christ Junior. Church of God in Jesus Christ. But the Baptists, 2 pods in the Spirit Baptists, Primitive Baptists, there are about 36 tribes of Baptists in the U.S., and they have numerous names. Anybody can form a church and just say we are Baptists, even if they don't baptize. Even if they don't baptize. And I mean to say don't baptize at all, neither infants nor adults or whatever. They can call themselves. The name is out there and it's free for anybody to appropriate. And some have appropriated the name Catholic too, in the same way, in other countries. Not here. I'm not aware in Jamaica, but elsewhere. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very, very much, Dr. Callum. I'm looking forward to the printed copy so I can study it.
That's right.
I was interested in your preamble, where you spoke about the ecclesiology of the Baptist Church. You reprised it a while ago when you asked me about autonomous churches. Here's a scenario. We are an autonomous church. I'm going to pick a name out of thin air, Zion Hill. And we go and we buy the land. And we build our church. And now we want to become members of the Jamaica Baptist Union. It's our land, our church. But we are now asked to contribute our land and our church into the union to be registered as JBU property. And then 20 years later, we want to come out. So you're saying that the individuals can leave and form.
You are free to come out, but the property
But
remains.
our property which we put into the union, we can't get it back.
No.
That sounds very Catholic to me. I mean, as I say, I'm interested in the ecclesiology of it, where instead of being particular churches, autonomous churches, you are now centralizing. That sounds very Catholic to me. And I'm interested in your appreciation of how the ecclesiology may have changed from the 1800s into the 2000s as you move away from being autonomous individual churches to being centralized under a union.
Okay.
Even though you did not seek to register the Baptist denomination as a corporation sole, which is what the Catholic Church did in the 1950s or 40s. We had trustees before, and then they kept dying and had to be replaced. And then ultimately, the decision was taken to form a corporation sole with the bishop being the person involved, which will change when the bishop changes. But as I say, the question interests me with the ecclesiology, how you're becoming more Catholic, it seems to me.
Actually, I'm very happy that I'm able to answer the question. When the World Council of Churches study on ecclesiology was being done, I was for 5 years a co-moderator of the study. And I was expected to interpret the Baptist position for the study that was being prepared. I was able, fortunately, to go back to the original documents of the Baptist Church in the 17th century to show that while the expression autonomy of the local church meaning local congregation, was used, it was used within a context before the Enlightenment. It was before the Enlightenment. Please remember that. It was before the Enlightenment, and therefore it was not autonomy that as understood in 18th century Europe. And it was always a sister and in close proximity to the claim of the partnership of the local churches. In other words, there's no change. There is a set of Baptists somewhere in the world, I will not mention them, they are well known, who behave as if they are autonomous. And they say their churches are free. But you listen to them carefully and see how many rules they make. They are now even telling churches that you can't have women pastors. So those autonomous churches can't have women pastors. JBU was never deceived. I think we were always in the spirit of the original understanding that the churches are autonomous in the sense that they are competent to discern what the Spirit is saying to them. But because no single congregation is the whole church, nor any single church in the wider sense, the whole church. We all rely on each other. We need to be in fellowship with one another if we are going to truly be the body of Christ. So it is not that there's a change. Maybe there's a greater clarity in the way we speak about the subject. But from the very beginning, and I have reference in the paper, the fuller paper, to some of the statements of faith that were issued in the 17th century to show how there was always that insistence on the authority of the individual congregation and the authority of the other congregations in relation. That's why I talked about Baptist covenantalism at the beginning. Not connectionalism, like the Methodists, and so on, but in our particular case, we believe we are true to the original understanding. We believe we are true to that understanding.
Thank you very much, Dr. Callan. Before Brother Maurice speaks, a question from online. It seems that persons are still having some challenges as it relates to the current context and the role of the corporation. So a similar scenario is being asked. If a church, if a congregation or a circuit of churches now decide to purchase some land for use other than for a church building, is it the circuit's property, or does the Jamaica Baptist Union have the authority to administrate over that land as well? Is it belonging to the denomination as well?
All properties owned by the churches are held in trust by the corporation. All properties, whatever their use or designation.
All right. The second part of that question, how do the trustees of the Jamaica Baptist Union oversee all the lands available now? How do they know what is available now?
Well, we have some former presidents and we have a general secretary here. I don't think I would presume to answer that, except to say they have the authority and they can take anybody to court who tries to misappropriate any of the properties that are supposed to be under the purview of the Jamaica Baptist Union Corporation. And so people better not try them out, because there is authority that they have. I'm afraid this is, the Incorporation Act says properties owned and to be owned.
Thank you for that.
Owned and to be owned.
Thank you so very much for that, Dr. Kalam. Mr. Jones and then Reverend Shireen Abrams.
Yes. Thank you very much for your presentation, Reverend Kalam. It has really brought a whole new understanding as a youngster in the Baptist tradition, but one who has an interest in this business of administering Baptist lands. My first question really was kind of answered by what Reverend Marvel repeated as the question from online, because we've said a lot about lands related to churches and church buildings, and it has started to address the business of other lands. And the extension of our question is, how do we, as the Jamaica Baptist Union, capture and administer lands bequeathed? Now, meaning, if a church member should bequeath land to, the church member might know the local church or the local pastor. How does the Baptist Union capture that information for it to be incorporated into the assets of the union?
Yes. Whether the Baptist Union captures the information or not, that the property exists, if there's a contention about it, it can be resolved by virtue of the fact that there's this openness to the Incorporation Act that allows for land to be added from time to time. I think those, the General Secretary might, I don't know if you want to speak about it. You want to speak to it? No. But there is an officer in the Jamaica Baptist Union who is responsible for the day-to-day management of those issues. I am not clear myself that over the years, the JBU has taken sufficient care to ensure that the items all the items that are being secured now are listed. When I was a pastor myself in the Maypen circuit and we bought land for the Mineralized Church, I advised the church to purchase the land in the name of the Jamaica Baptist Union, because even if we buy the land in another name, it didn't make any sense. So I know there are certain people who are doing that. They are securing land in the name of the JBU, handing over the title to the JBU office. Because effectively, as long as the JBU is holding the lands in trust for the churches, it's doing the right thing. I'm afraid I did not design this thing. I'm just telling you what the reality is.
Is that a follow-up, Reverend Eugene? All right, so we'll take Reverend Yield. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Reverend Callum, just a scenario, sir. We're in, well, when I arrived at a certain circuit, I met a group of individuals who were worshiping in a certain place. By then, the moderator had allowed them to formulate a company to purchase lands. So the land was now in a company called so-and-so company. I recognized the trouble, and I pushed a little bit to ask for them to turn the properties over to the Jamaica Baptist Union. And the shareholders of the company said no, they wouldn't do so. And so I left that place very tentative and nervous. Since they have fired me, and I'm elsewhere, that church has become a full member of the Jamaica Baptist Union. I am not sure, because I'm no longer the pastor and I'm not in the internal politics, whether or not that particular church, the lands came over from the company to the Jamaica Baptist Union. So we're in, let's say, that has not happened. Where would we be in such a situation?
As far as my understanding goes, as soon as the JBU has knowledge of that situation, if anyone tries to alienate the property, to sell the land or to hand it over to others, the JBU can intervene to claim right to that property. That's my understanding. I don't work in the JBU office. I don't know the ins and outs of how the thing happens in the office. But I know it's a huge portfolio. It's a huge portfolio. And I would advise people not to try to do anything funny with the land because they may get themselves in trouble.
Hey.
But I think that, as I said, I believe that this is one of the great decisions made by the leaders of the union over the years. And we salute them for their foresight in this regard. If you want to become a part of a JBU, read the Constitution and understand, and I think every effort should be made to alert those who are asking to become members of the JBU to understand what it means for their property. Yes, sir.
Reverend Callum, I think you just touched the critical point there. What's the process of becoming a member of the Jamaica Baptist Union? And in that process, is it just you come up Sunday morning to the assembly and shake hand, and you are a member of the Jamaica Baptist Union, and that handshake comes with the legal ramifications? Or is there somewhere in the process of becoming a church, a recognized church within the Jamaica Baptist Union, you are given walkthrough, or perhaps even you have to sign this contract to say that you are a member and you bring the property and it's now the JBU's?
I have never superintended that process, but I imagine that there is a lot of consultation. Remember that when a church applies for membership in JBU, they have to have recommendations from churches in the vicinity, recommendations from the association. There are all sorts of opportunities for there to be the exchange of information and conscientization so people know what they are doing, what they are getting into. But I don't know actually what happens. But I expect that that should be possible.
Can the General Secretary assist us with that? The microphone. All right, come Madam Jensen. And then Reverend Abrams.
The General Assembly minutes would have captured that such a church was received into the Jamaica Baptist Union. And that's a legal document.
It's not the handshake. What she's saying is not the handshake, is the assembly action, ratification.
All right, but I've not heard anything about the process, Madam Jensek. That part, are the people walked through and told that not just your membership, you have to send church return form, but they know that they carry the property with them and it's no ours and them can't get it back?
I'm not sure it's put the way you're putting it. However, once a church indicates an interest in moving from mission status to church status, there are certain procedures, including documentation, that's completed.
No,
It doesn't say that. It doesn't say that. But the act of incorporation addresses the situation. So what we need to do is to ensure that we are familiar with the act of incorporation.
yeah.
Okay, thank you so very much. Reverend Abrams, I know you're burning. And then, of course, I'll come to Dr. Liele and my sister over there. I see your hand.
Dr. Miller.
Eh? Professor Miller. Oh, I'm sorry, Prof. No slide. Prof. Miller and then my sister over there. Go ahead, Reverend Abrams.
Thank you, Reverend Laws. Reverend Kalam, thank you very much. I would have asked you this question if I had a phone number for you, but I didn't have a number, so I had to make my way here from way up in the hills to come ask you this question. Sir, there is a particular circuit that I'm familiar with, and there is an issue there that the nature of it is that there is one of the churches that has been around for probably over 20 odd years. And that church has gone through a whole some serious stages in terms of development. So where it is right now is that it's built for probably 150, but there is only 2 persons in the church, right in the middle of a well-built community with all facilities right in the middle of the road. And so I would have been asking myself, what was the problem with this church? Anyway, the long and short of it is that the little historical study that I did revealed that at some point in time in this church's life, help was needed, pastor couldn't manage, so somebody recommended somebody with some kind of background, and they came. But what they did was that they weren't Baptists. So the long and the short of it, when they left, the building was still standing, but the persons in the church went with this individual who was a non-Baptist at the time. Herein lied the problem, because the Jamaica Baptist Union has this church with serious piece of land right in the middle of a community, well-known community. There's a Baptist church there, but there's no Baptist witness. And it's one of the most difficult things for over 20 odd years to build back that church, even to say a membership of even 10. It created a problem in my mind because I'm able to make a link somewhere else. But the question I have for you, sir, in relation to the presentation and your wide knowledge, what happens? Because in the presentation, it is a situation whereby you have a church, a Baptist church, you have differences of opinion, persons can take the membership, but they have to leave the church building. So the understanding is the members who are legitimately Baptists or want to be Baptists, they will stay, oftentimes in the minority, and those who want to go their way, which is oftentimes the majority, they can leave and get land. But what happens if it is the reverse? In that the Baptist members are in the minority, but they are the ones who leave. And they leave the church building with the benches and the pulpit and everything. But the person who is now operating the church has the Baptist building, because they can't come out of the corporation, but they don't have a Baptist witness. So what the church, the union has, is a building, but no Baptist witness. What happens to that church? Because is there anything that says that the pastor has to leave if he or she goes another way? What happened in that scenario when the union has a church, but no Baptist, no witness, and the person who is operating the Baptist church, using the amenities and everything, doesn't have a Baptist witness or a Baptist affiliation, but is conducting church in the Baptist church?
In my opinion, that a matter like that should be brought to the attention of the union so that it can be addressed, and some resolution can be arrived at. That's all I could say. That should be brought to the attention of the JBU so that they would address it.
Because that is not a tenable situation. It shouldn't be continuing at all.
Dr. Liele, then Professor Miller.
Right. Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to agree that the Incorporation Act perhaps is one of the most significant things that we did as a union. And I wanted to use an example. Some years ago, when I served in the mission agency, there was a church in St. Thomas called Grand Spen Church. It was a revival church, and the pastor was now old. And the congregation felt that they needed to be under some umbrella to protect the future ministry and to secure the future of the church. So they approached the JBU to say, we would like to come under your umbrella because that's the only way we can see that we can protect our future in perpetuity. And we want to have some kind of a family membership because normally when a church under the leadership of an individual, that person dies, the church dies with it. And so they came, we had the conversation about their property and about that, and the event and everything came across with them. I'm using that illustration to make the point that sometimes when we think about the corporation and the JBU owning the property, we're not understanding that ownership is to hold it in trust for you and for generations yet to come. Because the persons who bought the land often are not the ones who are in the church now. And Reverend Kalam, your example of the Killick Church, for us should be the wonderful example of what happens when you don't have a corporation. So I think it is not them taking over our land. It is a body holding the property in trust so that all members of the church now and in the years to come will have the use of it, and it will not go with some errant deacon or errant pastor deciding to cut it up and sell it and buy it and do all kinds of things. So I think that is how we have to appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thank you so very much. Professor Miller.
Reverend Callum, thank you for a marvelous lecture. I'm looking forward to the printed version of it, really, because you have opened up a whole set of things. I hope we realize that when we're talking about incorporation, we spoke to various acts, the acts of 1874, the Act of 1969. I won't go into who was controlling the government and the state in those years when those acts were passed. But it was, I don't know what to call it. I served in the Senate for 5 years. And during that time, there were many such bills that came before the Senate. And we had Dr. Lloyd Barnett, who was the convener of the independent senators, of whom I was one, and then members of the private bar as well. And when these bills came up, and they were discussed by us to see how we're going to deal with it, I learned a great deal of things, which I could summarize this way. We are not only dealing with Baptists, we're dealing with the laws of Jamaica. And the fact of the matter is that there's a difference between those churches that were state churches, namely the Anglican Church and the Presbyterian Church, which is dealt with in a different way from the other denominations. The Catholics solve their problem in a different way. But I just illustrate the point by saying this. The essence of the incorporation is in the Properties Act of Jamaica. Whatever is built on your property with your consent or given to you is yours, and it remains there forever. So you can do anything you want, but you can't trouble, it's not the building, you can't trouble the land and everything on it. Now, when it comes to questioning this one does that, there's a whole jurisprudence and experts of the law. So when these scenarios are put, they are dealt with by learned counsel and not by us working it out.
But I would think, and I'll tell you one that caught my eye, I've never forgotten it. This bill was a bill that came from the Church of God of Prophecy, the pillar and the ground of truth without controversy, Keith Dominion Branch. It took me a while to unpack that, and it has lodged in my mind. In other words, we are dealing with the law, how it comes out. I don't know how you split the pillar and the ground of truth and then get no controversy, and then get a branch and a name of a person. But anybody who owns that now owns it in perpetuity. I also say this as a young member of Bethel. I was astounded that when Bethel decided to join the JBU, a set of members departed. And I didn't quite understand why they left. I only know that they left and some of the issues. But it's only going into the Senate that I realize what are the issues here with respect to matters like property. So I'm saying, remember, we are dealing with the laws of Jamaica and not simply the Jamaica Baptist Union.
Thank you so much, Prof. My sister, my African sister there, and then Reverend Duncan. Before Reverend Duncan, one question from online. Go ahead, sis.
Reverend Cullum, thank you very much for the upshot you've given us of the historical of the...
Could you put up, yes, turn it, right.
Reverend Cullum, thank you very much for the upshot you've given us of the historical Baptist in terms of property in Jamaica. I was brought up in a country where there's a lot of properties that are sort of delegated to individuals. My question is that sometimes when they're in trust, the trust members sort of die and the property sort of goes into disrepair, and the church themselves sell off these properties. Now, you didn't really touch on individuals sort of delegating properties and perhaps let it remain in their memorandum. For example, if an individual delegates their property to a particular church, for example, it goes into the Baptist Union. My concern is that whatever the person might say, the individual might say in their memorandums, for example, they would sort of say the property might not be sold, which sometimes it is sold off. You didn't really touch on that individual aspect. Can you just give us a little clarity on that, please?
I think both of us I think a lot of us are trying to keep up with the accent, my sister. And so we did not hear you clearly. Could you just give us one line, what exactly you want him to answer for you? And hold up the microphone. Okay, the microphone, turn it on.
If an individual delegates their property to their particular church and state in the memorandum that it's not to be sold, because very often I come from a country where there are a lot of trust and members are old and property gets into disrepair and it's sold off. But if an individual you didn't touch on individuals stating in their memorandum that the property is not to be sold, but it's to be used for whatever purposes they might indicate. What clarity is there? Can you sort of clarify that for us, please, in terms of letting the Baptists, leaving one's property in trust?
All right, so let me ask you back. You're asking if someone purchases land in their name, a property in their name, and they are giving it to the Jamaica Baptist Union, or to the church, and they say it's not to be sold. Give me the rest now.
What clarity is there? Because in my experience, the property might be sold off because it gone into disrepair or whatever.
All right. So you want to know that if the property, even though there's a stipulation from the owner or the person who is giving it over to the church that says it mustn't be sold, once it gets into the church's purview and the Jamaica Baptist Union, if it overrides that clause that it must not be sold. That's what you're asking? Go ahead, Rev.
It wouldn't be sold to the JBU.
No. Okay, so a member of the Slagerville church gives some property to the church. But they say it must not be sold.
Yeah.
Can the JBU sell it?
I think the JBU would respect that.
All right. Did you hear that, sis? That the Jamaica Baptist Union would respect those wishes.
So. I would think so.
That if it's not to be sold, it would not be sold. All right. Before we move on, there is someone online, Nicole Cameron, who is asking, does the Jamaica Baptist Union advise churches against purchasing property? So on the one hand, we're talking about purchasing and bringing into the denomination. Is there any place now under the Act of Incorporation where the trustees would say, or the denomination would step in and say, no, do not enter into such an arrangement because it might have some negative impacts, etc.? Is there any such?
Once a church is interested in purchasing property, the Jamaica Baptist Union Corporation should be contacted through the General Secretary, and the requisite guidance would be given. So once there is interest in any kind of sale or acquisition, the Jamaica Baptist Union Corporation should be written to indicate the interest, and the requisite legal advice would be given to the church.
And further follow-up, does the Jamaica Baptist Union take on financial liability for the properties in the corporation?
That's a very interesting question. The simple answer is yes. Yes, in the sense that once the properties are a part of the Jamaica Baptist Union Corporation, the churches really do not have any legal ownership. It is the Jamaica Baptist Union. So the liability of the church becomes the liability of the Jamaica Baptist Union. That's the reality.
And one more from the Jamaica Baptist Women's Federation Media. The Jamaica Baptist Union's constitution was recently amended, yet the named trustees are primarily male, which does not reflect demographics of the constituency. What action will be taken in this regard?
The Jamaica Baptist Union Act of Incorporation is an act of parliament. We are not at liberty to change names unless we go back to the parliament.
That is correct. That is correct.
Thank you so very much. Reverend Dione Duncan. Oh, yes.
Reverend Callum, it's a simple thing I'm trying to clarify. If the properties are held in trust by the JBU and there is a need for the monetization of assets, lands or building, the trustees meet and make that decision and then propose it to the church? Or can the trustee just make that decision to say, this is what is needed and we will go ahead to do that? Or is there collaboration between trustees and local church? I hope I'm clear.
Yes, it's very clear. My understanding is that JBU is not in the business of selling land. However, if a particular church wants to alienate a piece of land in order to do something that is reasonable, they can request the permission of the union for this to be done by sending the appropriate communication to the JBU office, and the corporation will address the subject and give them a response. But JBU itself is not in the business of selling land.
It's not just sale of land, sir, but let me say use of the land. So you're having the properties, the buildings held in trust, but they're just sitting there. And there is some idea or thought that these could be used to bring income into the union, not necessarily to sell, but so could the trust, is it a, no, that's not could. Is it a situation where the trustees can make that decision solely among themselves? Or is there always going to be dialogue between trustee and local church?
I can't envisage a situation where the trustees by themselves would make a decision without any reference to the churches. I can't envisage that.
So
Remember,
there's always going to be collaboration.
I can't say that, but I say I can't envisage that. In other words, the land is in trust on behalf of the churches. It's not for the JBU administration. It's in trust on behalf of the churches. Therefore, I think that there would always be the spirit of dialogue between the corporation and the churches. I would think so.
Before Reverend Rosalina comes, some of the lands that the Jamaica Baptist Union owns, or that is being held in trust, are not necessarily connected to a church per se, or a congregation per se. And in that case, with whom would the trustees consult?
Let's take, for example, the lands in Nutshell.
They want to hear it.
The Nutshell lands. I imagine that any intention to sell a portion of the Nutshell land would perhaps arise in the Nutshell committee, and then they would write to the corporation to seek their advice on the subject. But I don't get the impression that the union would be acting unilaterally. I don't get that impression at all.
All right. Thank you very much, Reverend Rosalina.
Thank you. Thank you, Reverend Callum, for the presentation. I'm reflecting on autonomy. And my question is, to what extent do you think our understanding or misunderstanding of autonomy has resulted in a lot of what we're seeing, still resulting in a lot of what we're seeing? And could you offer us that section again, that definition that you gave on the autonomy of the local church?
In 2007, I presented a paper on the autonomy of the church at a Baptist conference in Germany. Maybe I could, if I can find it, I could share it with you. It is a very problematic issue, your question of autonomy. And there are those of us who believe that you can only resolve it by going back to the beginning and by reflecting on the articles of faith that were established, that were agreed by the Baptists in the Netherlands, by the Baptists in England, and some of them were adopted in various ways by the Baptists in North America, which explain the terms, the doctrinal foundations of the Baptist Church. And as I said, Baptists are a people who, Paul Fides of Oxford, a noted Baptist theologian, has argued that the central notion in Baptist theology is not baptism, it's covenant. It's covenant. Baptists are a covenantal people. There are people who believe that whatever you are doing for Christ is done through collaboration and consultation. That is why, for example, in a single congregation, you don't just have a pastor, but you have other spiritual leaders, pastors and deacons, spiritual leaders who confer. Beyond that, you have the church council as also a body for discernment. And then beyond that, you have the church membership. The same thing happens at the translocal level. The general secretary and the president of the JBU exercise personal oversight, personal episcopacy, to use language more familiar in other places. The executive exercises collegial episcopacy, collegial oversight, and the assembly gathered together, they exercise general oversight. So the tripartite expression is existing in our context as well. And all of this is because we are a people in covenant with God and in covenant with one another. We are not isolationists and independents. We are covenantal people.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kalam. We're about to wrap up as we close off for the night. And just two questions from online for the General Secretary to offer clarity to persons who are asking. Madam Jensen, could you please use the microphone? Is the church required to pay land taxes, and who pays, the Jamaica Baptist Union or the church or circuit?
There is some allowance by the tax authorities for certain portions of land. I'm not remembering the exact amount now that is used by the church to be exempt. But there are some cases in which the taxes have to be paid.
And the second one, this person is asking for clarity. They have heard that some of the property at Nutshell in Duncan's has been sold without the JBU's knowledge or permission. Could you please clear that up for us?
I strongly believe that that is fake news.
Fake news. That is fake news. Thank you so much, Madam Jensek. But I have to give this one to the president. You get a presidential pass, Mr. Prezi, and then we are going to invite the Reverend Devere Nugent to close off the vote of thanks and then the wrapping up, the dismissal. Mr. President, you get the last one. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm asking a question about ethos, Reverend Callum. Since the law of 1969, the situation with property has been far less contentious. Is it simply because of the fact of the law? As the law helped to create a new atmosphere, did the process starting from so many years before of discussion help to facilitate a new ethos? Or is it that, as you said in response to our earlier question, that we have become better able to express our theological understanding of working together? What would, if there's an ethos, if you believe there's a new ethos, what you believe is responsible for it? What are the elements contributing to it? And I believe there is a desire to also find out about whether the law of incorporation would apply to churches outside of Jamaica that are affiliated with the union.
Questions of causation, I remit to the divine province. I don't answer those questions. I don't know. I can have opinions, but I can't be sure that it's right. Questions of causation, I remit above. So I don't know. It is possible. It is possible that there's a more sophisticated understanding of what it means to be a Baptist, but I really don't know. I don't know. I would hope that the discussion we have had here would help to quell some of the doubts that people have. But of course, if there's anyone who does not agree, they can test the thing in court. Because this is based on law, Jamaican law. The church proposes, Parliament agrees, the act is signed, so anything can be tested in court. But the fact of the matter is that I'm giving the understanding I've had for a long time, and believe me, I've spent too much time reading the documents over the years.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Kalam. Really want to say thanks to you. Let us put our hands together for the presentation and our presenter. Truly grateful. And we invite Mr. Dwight Stewart, a member of the Historical Society, to bring the vote of thanks.
Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, it is my honor to express our deepest appreciation to all for making the 21st Georgia lecture a resounding success. Indeed, the title of the lecture, of Church, Lands and Buildings, 19th Century Jamaica Baptist Story, you would agree with me that this insightful presentation delved into the historical aspects of the Jamaica Baptist Union, offering a historical insight into the role of the church lands and buildings in the denomination's development during the 19th century. The lecture's theme was aptly chosen to mark the 175th anniversary of the Jamaica Baptist Union, highlighting the significance of this milestone. And we are truly privileged to have had the opportunity to express and celebrate this important part of our history. We express our heartfelt gratitude to the Reverend Dr. Neville Callum. We've got to give him a clap for him, please. Our esteemed lecturer, for a comprehensive discourse. We thank you, sir, for the way you shared insight and your wisdom in answering the questions. Our appreciation also goes out to our moderator, Reverend Marvel Laws, for her guidance and support throughout the lecture. To all those who participated in this afternoon's program, we say thanks. And I must indicate that Dr. Elaine Allen was caught up And for that reason, she was not able to participate the way she was assigned to. But we want to say thanks to the Reverend Rosalina Robinson and to Dr. Frederica Fairclough for taking part in this evening's program. Special thanks to the East Queen Street Baptist Church for giving an item and also for graciously hosting this event. I want to say also thanks to Mr. O'Neill Byfield for his valuable contributions from the JBU office. And finally, we express our gratitude to all participants who joined us, you in the sanctuary, and for those online via YouTube for their dedication and their support in making this afternoon's lecture the success that it is. On behalf of the Historical Society, we say thanks to you and God bless you.
I invite Reverend Nugent, pastor of the East Queen Street Baptist Church, to dismiss us with prayer and the benediction.
And the church say amen. And the church say amen. Amen. My family in Christ, before I pray, I just ask you to engage me in a pastoral or pastor's privilege to indicate to those of us that we are currently in touch with the First African Baptist Church of Savannah, Georgia. And they will be here at East Queen Street next year, June, the 8th of June, second Sunday of June, for a worship experience. More will be said about that, but I would want for us to begin to carve that into our diaries from this moment. Amen, church? Lord, on a quiet. Let's all stand for prayer. And before I pray, Dr. Callum, I want to report, happy to report, that the East Queen Street that you spoke of in the opening part of the presentation no longer exists. Praise God. Let us pray. Sovereign God, our Father, you have been faithful. You have been good. We are grateful for the ways in which you have orchestrated your work in the world through the Baptist in Jamaica and by extension the Jamaica Baptist Union. Grateful we are as well for the resources you have given to us in the lands we currently own as a denomination. O God, as stewards of your grace, we accept the God-given responsibility to pass on to the generations to come much more than we have received. So hear our prayers this evening, and we leave here purpose in our hearts that by your grace we will work the works of him who sent us while it is day, for the night comes when none will be able to work. So for our leadership, for the Jamaica Baptist Union, for the partnering congregation, grant us your grace as we so sojourn. May the spirit of George Liele, may those who came with and after him inspire us to go and to grow in God's grace. And may the people of God know that the blessing of God the Almighty in the Father, through the Son, and by the power of the Holy Spirit will rest, remain, and abide with all of us from this moment and onwards. Through Jesus Christ our Lord, we pray. Amen.
Thank you so very much. I see you all don't want to leave, but good night. Have a good week. and see you at the 22nd presentation of the George Liele lecture, God's willing. Take care.